Hey folks, Jason here, Olde Carr Guy. Welcome back to the third installment of the Yugo engine swap. And today we're going to be trying to take the suspension out of the Echo and putting it into the Yugo and seeing what we've got to do. Let's get to it. Hey guys, today's sponsor in this video is TMR Customs. We've also got them up here on the board. They've sponsored us in the past. So let me show you what they have to offer. One of my favorite organizational tools in the shop is this TMR jack stand holder. Each piece holds two jack stands, and I've got two of them here in the wall that I've custom painted myself. And they hold almost every single type of jack stand that you can put on here. And if you're like me and you're moving away from air tools and into battery power, maybe it's time to get one of these cordless tool organizers to hang your tools up and keep them organized so that they're readily available. So if you want a cordless tool organizer or the jack stand brackets, make sure you head over to TMR Customs and look them up. They ship anywhere, worldwide. And get yourself t-shirts and stickers. So make sure you check out Tim and Mike Rogers over at TMR Customs. I'll leave a link down in the description box below. So today the challenge is going to be basically getting the subframe out from underneath the Echo, including the struts and excluding the rack and pinion. We've got to get that out of there simply because we want to get everything down as flat as possible. Probably going to have to cut off that engine mount. But we want to get this dropped down. We're going to be fighting with some rust here today. This one's not going to be too bad. We got two bolts at the top here on the struts. And then we've got the lower control arm down there, as well as the sway bar up front. All those bolts should come out fairly easy. The tie rods, we've already had those off, so no big deal. In fact, I think the nuts are even still loose from when we took the axles out. So once we get that down out of the way, we'll have clear sailing. We got to get these engine mounts, this one here, as well as the transmission mount over there, out. And then we can take this setup, pull it over here, see what we're going to be up against. We got some fabrication to do here, guys. And like I said before, we're probably going to need someone a little bit smarter than me, but I'm going to take what I know, which isn't much, and see if we can make this setup in the Echo actually fit, because if all we got to do is narrow it, we might be into something here. So we're going to drop it, get it over here, sneak it up in place, and start lining things up, making sure things are plumb and level and all that stuff. We don't want that pushing the engine and transmission down further away from the car. So we're going to take some measurements on the struts too to see where the height needs to be. Then at some point in this video, we're going to take the 1NZ engine and we're going to set it down inside the engine compartment here on the Yugo to see if we're going to be able to mount that thing in the proper spot. Is it going to mount in the same place here as the Yugo engine did? I don't know. So that's what we've got to find out. So we're going to set up a time lapse of getting the suspension out from underneath the Yugo, and then we'll break for a minute. We'll come over, we'll do the same thing with the Echo, and then we can start trading some parts here to see what's going on. Let's get to it. Everything undone except for that lower control arm down there, which I can probably tap out like so. We got one bolt on each side for the strut. Woo! 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 There's one. Two. So from start to finish, all those bolts came loose. I had trouble with one right here on the sway bar, but everything else pretty much came loose because most of it was already loose. But I would say we probably have about 20 to 25 minutes involved in getting that dropped. So now what we've got to do is focus our attention on the rusty Echo and basically do the same thing. We've got a subframe to deal with. I think there's one There's gonna be 4 bolts, 4 pretty big bolts that we've got to get out of there. I know they're gonna be rusty, I know they're gonna fight us. The rack and pinion on this car is bolted into the subframe, which is rusty. That's gonna give us a problem. But other than that, the struts themselves should just fall out of place. I've been spraying it with some Lefty Loosey all week, so hopefully we'll give it one last shot here before we get in there. So let's see if we can get these ones out. So I started doing a time lapse on this and I stopped it simply because I didn't think you wanted to see me time lapse about an hour of real time fighting with these bolts, because you know, just me be standing there. So I stopped it and I've gotten to the point where I've got the 4 bolts broken loose that hold the subframe up. There's 2 little connecting rods that go back that tie the subframe in. I mean, they're only about as big as my pinky finger. Those bolts were swollen, they were just seized up so bad that I just took the Sawzall, cut those, and I got the brake lines removed. So now you get the time lapse of me struggling to get this thing out of here. Hopefully with my impact, it's not very strong, but hopefully with my impact I can back those out the rest of the way. Let's do it. Tried lowering this thing down a couple times, and I think where we're hung up is on this little joint right here where the power steering, where the steering shaft comes down to the rack. It's kind of seized in there, so we got to spray it down and see if we can get that done or released. So let's get it up. All right, so now that our subframe is away from the car, we gotta sneak it out and get these, see if we can get these struts out of here without, you know, we don't wanna scratch the paint. So let's get that out. All right, so as you saw, we got the subframe out of the Toyota, not with too much struggle. And we've also removed the struts, I guess, at this point. Because they're just flopping around, it's gonna make it easier to get the subframe up underneath the Yugo. So we temporarily have it in place here. And as you can tell, I'm gonna have to likely strip off the rack and pinion as well as the sway bar to get this thing moved back a little bit further and up a little bit further. And let me show you why we gotta go back and up. So the reason why we've got to go back is because we've got to find the center, which I have not physically done yet. We've got to find the center of the wheel well to match the center of the axle going in to the spindle here. So this has got to come back this way to find that center, which we'll take a measuring tape and we'll hang a string off the fender here. We want that wheel to be 100% center in the wheel well, obviously. But in order to get the chassis back this way, all of this is in the way. The sway bar, most importantly, is hitting up against the floor of the car. So if we can get that off, we can slide this back a little bit further and jack it up. Now, this mount right here, which was the mount for the Echo, is not too far off from reaching back here on the floor. So if we have to build a structure, we could build a structure and put a bolt up through that and weld a brace and a bracket in here. This one, we're gonna have to do the same thing. The frame rail is right here, but we're gonna have to kind of build something for that to bolt into and a capture nut on the underside. Once we figure out where or how far up we can go, because we've got to make sure that we get the ride height, then we can take our struts and see if they're gonna work up in there. If the Echo struts will work up in here, then we've got to figure out where the placement is. Now in the last video I told you I took the measurements and they've got to be mounted out this way, but I'm thinking if we can find a way to get this mounted to the Yugo, just simply maybe by narrowing it the couple of inches that we need to, and I'm thinking that's all it's going to take. If you look at this mount that stands up, it's out that way a little bit. If we were to bring that in, just a couple inches to meet the frame rail and do the same thing on the other side, then we might be able to have a usable subframe. Obviously not this one because it's rusty, but then we know we can go look for an Echo subframe to make work on this car, one that's in better shape than this one. Once we have the subframe figured out and how it's going to mount, then we can worry about the geometry of the actual suspension. I want to use, like I said before, as much of the Echo suspension as possible. So if we have to replace parts down the road, you look up an 05 Toyota Echo, control arm bushings, tie rod, ball joint, whatever you happen to need, brakes even, will be all for that car, and it will be a simple bolt-on, no big deal. So I'm going to drag this thing back out of here, and we're going to see if we get that sway bar off, maybe even the rack and pinion, and I'll be right back. Well, before we get back to work, guys, I just wanted to pop in and let you guys know the Lincoln is sold. Yep, I've been dealing with a young fella here today, and him and his dad come in. There'll be a quick video on that, so stay tuned. The Lincoln is sold. Now we can move on to another project to help fund this one. Let's get back to work. So this is where I'm having a little bit of struggle, is because I'm not a fabricator and, well, I've never done this before. So one of the things that we've got to do is we've got to get this up into place. Now I took the sway bar off. There it is there. So we'll get this back up into place and using the floor jack kind of hold it there, because we want to also make sure that not only is this going to be centered in this wheel well, but if it is, will it still hold the engine where the engine needs to be? So we're gonna have to get that 1NZ chained up to the cherry picker again, drag it over here and start dropping it into place to see if the engine in its placement is gonna be the same spot or good for this one. Do you know where I'm going with that? I don't know how else to explain it. One's gotta fit before the other. I'm not sure which, but again, I think we gotta get the engine in there to make sure that this is going to sit and not be in the way of the engine as well, but still be able to utilize that rear mount. The one I struggled with when I took it out. Anyway, let's shoehorn literally is how I would describe getting this engine between the frame rails. Right down here, like, we're touching, and it's kind of at an angle. The transmission, I don't have the chain set up exactly, and I don't have a balancer to be able to balance it out with right here, but we still have, you know, a little bit of room here on this side. So if I just take the engine and kind of swing it around so that it's sitting the way it's supposed to, I think we got plenty of room here. As well as over here. I wouldn't want to be changing a serpentine belt on one of these things, so we will make sure we put a brand new one on it. And we'll have to see if we can get this thing sitting level so that we know exactly where it's going to sit in the vehicle. As we can tell, we've got a mount here that I had to take off, but we should be able to make something work here from this to this. We'll build a bracket, and you can see where the factory Yugo mount was. We'll probably be able to build a bracket right there to house the mount that we took out, which basically sits right there. So like we're pretty freaking close on this side. Over here, a little bit different story, but I think we're going to be able to mount something here on this frame rail to hold up this side. Now, one thing I did notice when I was cutting the battery tray out, we got a little bit of rot here, probably from the battery leaking. So we're going to have to fix that, stiffen that up big time, and this is some of the things that we run across, I guess. So we'll have to get that addressed when we start fabricating for our brackets here. But guys, this thing's going to fit. And like I said, we've got to figure out where our axles are going to go and where this has to sit one way or the other. we're very close, and I think we're gonna be able to make it work.
And to be honest with you, I did have my doubts, but from my research, from a lot of the comments on these videos, as well as TikTok. TikTok is blowing up, by the way. TikTok loves Yugo engine swaps, or the Yugo in general. Every time I put out a TikTok on this car, it gets 10, 20, 30, 40,000 views. There's a couple of them on there, way up over 100,000 views. TikTok loves Yugos, and if you don't follow me over on TikTok, make sure you do. From what I'm understanding is that at some point in time there was a Toyota engine which they classified as a 1SZ, S as in Sam, FE, and they put them, it was basically this motor, they put them in these cars. There's no telling for sure how many. Some people say there was only 8, some say 5, some say as little as 3. Prototypes were made with this engine and transmission setup into one of these cars. So it must have been the later years, because the 1NZFE didn't come out, I don't think, until 01 or 2. You guys can correct me in the comments, but it was the early 2000s. So they were playing around with this idea once upon a time. The fact that they'd made so few tells me something. Probably didn't fit very well. And it was probably too much power for these cars. Anyway, I'm gonna get this thing stabilized so that it's sitting where I want it to, so I can pull the engine hoist away, and we'll take a look at where the center drive line is going to be compared to the wheel well. So let's do that.
Well, there. We've got the transmission propped up on a jack on this side, and we've got it sitting on a 2x4 on its end on this side with the engine mount reinstalled. The engine looks like it's tilted down that way a little bit, so we are a little high over here on this side, but it fits. There's clearance in the front. There's clearance on the back. We've got lots of room down here for goodies. Where we don't have lots of room, I mean, it looks like it now, but remember, we've got to get that manifold somehow tucked down in there to go underneath the car. I think this is roughly within, I don't know, within an inch or so of where this engine has to sit. Because you keep in mind, once you get that hood on there, you're not going to have a whole lot of clearance between the oil fill cap and the bottom of the hood. But this is in here. This is roughly where it's going to sit, and we have room. So now what we've got to do is we've got to get this stabilized in here somehow, and I think the way that I'm going to do that, we've got an engine support that we use over at the other shop that sits on both sides of the fender wells here, and will hold the engine in place, and we can balance that up where we need to. And we can do that removing the stand down there. That way we can get the subframe kind of poked under there and see if we can still get it mounted up where we need to, so that everything will line up properly as far as mounts and exhaust, to make sure we have room. If you guys remember, when that subframe was back in here, it kind of blocked a lot of this area here, and we still have the exhaust to deal with. When we do a turbo, it's a different story, because we can kind of turn the manifold upside down or have it come back around this way, and we've got all this space right here in behind the engine for turbo plumbing, intercoolers, and all that stuff when that time comes. And as it sits right now, we have got, as far as I'm concerned, plenty of room. I think we got plenty of room to work with, but it's still going to take some fabricating. I'm going to see if I can get my old man up here to take a look at this and see if we can utilize using the subframe. If not, maybe there's a way that we can use and build this without a subframe, similar to the way it was before. But remember, we got to keep it strong, because we're going to be adding turbo to this down the road, likely seeing 2 to 250 foot-pounds of torque, maybe even more than that. I don't know. So that is going to twist this thing all to pieces. You saw the rusty frame rail. We got to get that fixed as well, which is no big deal. We can grind that out and put a piece of angle iron or a piece of plate in there, make that work. But I think we're off to a great start by getting this engine sat down in there. It looks great, and I can't wait to hear it running. If you guys haven't already subscribed to my YouTube channel, I would ask
very politely, if you would, because those subscriptions and these views and giving a thumbs up all helps boost and grow the channel. It may not mean much to you, but it certainly does to me. So please hit that subscribe button. It is free. If you don't like what I'm doing later on down the road, you can always unsubscribe. No commitment. And like I said, it's free. So hit the subscribe button, like it, hit the share if you want to share it out with your friends on your social media. Follow me on Instagram, follow me on TikTok, as well as Facebook. We're always posting updates as we go along with this car. Guys, stay focused on the windshield, not the rear view mirror. I love you. God bless. Let's do it again in the next one.